Take your child and get out, the fiancé screamed at the maid. What the billionaire did will break your heart. Hey, stop scrolling for a second, because what I'm about to tell you. This one hit me right in the chest. 28-year-old Maid. A tiny 3-year-old girl holding a stuffed rabbit. A billionaire who thought he had his whole life figured out. And a fiancé who said 2 words that changed everything. Get out. Just like that. In front of everyone. No warning. No mercy. Just cold, sharp cruelty aimed at a woman who had done nothing wrong. And a baby girl who didn't even understand what was happening. But here's the thing nobody saw coming. What that billionaire did next. Nobody in that room expected it. I promise you, by the end of this story you won't be the same. Welcome back, beautiful souls, to this channel, where every story we share is designed to remind you that kindness still exists, love still wins, and people can still surprise you in the most breathtaking ways. Before we dive in, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city and country in the comments below. I genuinely love seeing where our incredible family is tuning in from around the world. Today's story is emotional. It's heartwarming. It has a twist that will genuinely catch you off guard. So get comfortable, grab something warm to drink, and let's get into it together. Sometimes the people the world overlooks are the ones carrying the most grace. Her name was Maya, 28 years old, single mother. And if you saw her walking down the street in her plain clothes with her little girl on her hip, you probably wouldn't look twice. That was the thing about Maya. She had learned very early in life how to be invisible. She hadn't always been this way. There was a time when Maya had plans. Big ones. She'd been 2 semesters away from finishing her nursing degree at a state university in Ohio when her mother got sick. Really sick. The kind of sick that doesn't negotiate. Maya dropped out, moved back home, and spent the next 1.5 years caring for her mother full-time while working evenings at a diner just to keep the lights on. Her mother passed on a Tuesday morning in November. Maya held her hand until the very end. She was 24 then, alone, and already exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. The man who would become her biggest mistake came shortly after. He was charming and funny and made her feel seen for the first time in years. She let herself believe in something again. And then, when she was pregnant and glowing and terrified and hopeful all at once, he left. No note, no call. Just gone, like a ghost who remembered he had somewhere better to be. So Maya raised her daughter, Jo, alone. Jo was 3 years old now. Bright-eyed and curly-haired, with a laugh like wind chimes and a habit of naming every single stuffed animal she owned. Her current favorite was a floppy brown rabbit she called Biscuit. Jo carried Biscuit everywhere. Grocery stores, doctor's offices, and now to work. Because Maya's babysitter had cancelled last minute, and Maya had no backup plan, and the job she'd managed to land as a live-in housekeeper at the Callaway estate was too important to lose. The Callaway estate sat on 12 acres just outside of Columbus. It was the kind of property that made people slow their cars down when they drove past the gates. Stone pillars, manicured hedges, a main house that looked more like a boutique hotel than someone's actual home. Maya had started working there 3 months ago, and in that time she had kept her head down, done her job immaculately, and stayed entirely out of the drama that occasionally swirled through the upper floors of that house. Her employer was a man named Ethan Callaway, 32 years old, tech billionaire, self-made, quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like someone who had learned the hard way that not every thought needed to be spoken out loud. He had built his company from a dorm room idea into a global platform worth nearly $4 billion. Forbes had profiled him twice. He drove a modest car. He tipped generously. He said please and thank you to every member of his household staff, something Maya had noticed immediately, because it wasn't as common as it should have been in houses like this. He was also engaged. Her name was Serena Voss, 28, blonde, beautiful in a way that required significant daily maintenance. Serena came from old money, the kind of family that had summer homes and winter homes and a complicated relationship with anyone they considered beneath them. She didn't say much to Maya directly. She mostly communicated through lists left on the kitchen counter. Things that needed to be done. Things that hadn't been done to her satisfaction. Things Maya needed to remember. Maya remembered everything. She was good at her job. But today was different. Today Joe was here. And Joe was 3. And 3-year-olds, no matter how well behaved, are still 3-year-olds. Maya had set up a small corner of the laundry room with Joe's coloring books and biscuit and a little container of crackers. She'd explained very carefully, in the serious voice she used when she needed Joe to really listen, that Mama needed to work and Joe needed to be very, very quiet. Joe had nodded with enormous seriousness and said, "Okay, Mama. Me and Biscuit will be quiet like mouses." It had worked. For 2 hours it had actually worked. And then Serena came home early. What would you do if you were in Maya's position? No backup, no options, just trying your best. The cruelest words are often spoken by people who've never had to struggle a single day in their lives. Serena's heels clicked across the marble foyer like a countdown. Maya heard them from the second-floor hallway where she was changing the guest room linens. She felt her stomach tighten instinctively, the way it always did when Serena was in the house, and something felt slightly off about the energy. She'd almost finished the last pillowcase when she heard the voice. "What is that?" It wasn't a question asked out of curiosity. It was the kind of question designed to make someone feel small. Maya moved quickly, heading toward the sound. She found Serena standing in the doorway of the laundry room, looking down at Joe the way someone might look at an unexpected pest they've discovered in their kitchen. Joe looked up at Serena with wide, innocent eyes, holding Biscuit to her chest. "Hi," Joe said cheerfully. "I'm Joe. This is Biscuit." Serena didn't smile. "Maya." Her voice was controlled, sharp, and absolutely arctic. "Explain." Maya stepped forward calmly. "My babysitter had a family emergency this morning. I had no other option. She's been in the laundry room all day. She hasn't bothered anyone, and I've been." "You brought a child into my home," Serena interrupted, her voice rising just slightly. "Without permission. Without asking. Without even telling me. I understand that, and I apologize. It won't happen again." "No," Serena said. "It won't." There was a beat of silence. The kind that always precedes something ugly. "Take your child and get out." The words landed like a slap. Maya blinked. Joe, who had been reaching for another cracker, went completely still. She didn't understand the full weight of what had been said, but she understood tone. And Serena's tone made her press Biscuit tighter against her chest. "Ms. Voss," Maya said carefully, keeping her voice steady. "I can have her picked up within the hour. I have a neighbor I can call. I just need—" "I said get out," Serena repeated. "Ooh. Your child. Your things. Today." She said it the way people say things when they've been waiting for an excuse. Like this moment had been prepared for. And Joe had simply been the trigger. Maya stood very still. Behind her she could feel Joe watching, and she would not cry in front of Joe. She would not. She had made herself that promise years ago. Joe would not see her mother break. Not today. Not in front of this woman. "I'll go get her things," Maya said quietly. She turned to gather Joe's coloring books and crackers and tuck them into the small bag. Joe reached up and took her mother's hand without being asked. She didn't say anything. She just held on. They were halfway down the hallway toward the stairs when a door opened. Ethan Calloway stepped out of his home office. He looked tired. He'd been on calls since early morning, the kind of marathon negotiation days that left him barely functional by afternoon. His tie was loosened. His sleeves were rolled up. He had a coffee mug in one hand and a look on his face that said he'd heard something from behind his closed door and wasn't entirely sure what it was. He looked at Maya. then at Joe, then at the bag in Maya's hand, then down the hallway toward where Serena was standing, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "What's going on?" he asked. His voice was quiet, measured. Nobody answered for a full 3 seconds. And then Joe looked up at him, this tall, tired stranger, and held out her rabbit. "Biscuit says hi," she announced seriously. Something crossed Ethan Calloway's face. It was fast, but it was there. "Do you think Serena had the right to make that decision? Tell me what you think in the comments. Sometimes it takes the honesty of a 3-year-old to expose everything a grown adult has been hiding." Ethan crouched down. That was the first thing that surprised Maya. Most people in his position, his tax bracket, his status, they don't crouch down for a 3-year-old they've never met. They acknowledge from a distance. They give a polite smile. They move on. Ethan Calloway crouched all the way down to Joe's level and looked at the rabbit. "Biscuit," he said thoughtfully. "That's a really solid name for a rabbit." Joe beamed. "I named him. Mama said I could name him whatever I wanted, so I named him Biscuit because biscuits are warm and soft, and so is he." "That's the best explanation I've ever heard," Ethan said. And then he stood up and looked at Maya, and his voice shifted. Still quiet, still measured, but different now. "Maya, can you tell me what happened?" Before Maya could answer, Serena's voice sliced through the hallway from the far end. "Ethan, this is not the conversation we need to have right now." He looked at his fiancée. Long look, then back at Maya. "Please," he said, "tell me." So Maya told him. Simply and clearly and without embellishment. Her babysitter's emergency. Her inability to find last-minute care. Her decision to bring Joe and keep her contained and quiet so she could still do her job. She didn't make excuses. She presented facts. When she finished, Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Did Joe bother anyone?" he asked. "No," Maya said. "Did she damage anything?" "No." "Did she leave the laundry room?" "Once to use the restroom. I walked her there and back." He nodded slowly. Then he looked at Serena. Serena lifted her chin. She should have asked permission. "You don't just bring personal matters into someone else's home." "This is my home," Ethan said. The words weren't loud. They weren't aggressive. But they were absolute. Serena blinked. "Maya works for me," he continued. "And she was faced with an impossible situation this morning, and she handled it responsibly. She kept her daughter safe, kept her out of the way, and still completed her work." He paused. "I don't see a problem." "Ethan." "Joe," he said, looking down at the little girl. "Are you hungry? Have you had lunch?" Joe considered this very seriously. "I had crackers. Mama packed them." "Crackers are a snack," he said. "Lunch is a meal. Do you like grilled cheese?" Joe's eyes went enormous. "That's my favorite." And that, right there, that was the moment everything started to change. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way spring begins, quietly, without announcement, and then suddenly everything is different. Ethan stood up fully and looked at his housekeeper with an expression that held something Maya hadn't expected to see there. Something that looked almost like apology. "Take the rest of the afternoon," he said. "Spend it with your daughter. Full pay." Behind them, Serena made a sound that was not quite a word. Ethan turned to face her. And what happened next, behind that closed office door where the two of them disappeared, Maya would only learn about weeks later, in pieces, from things people said and things she overheard and one conversation Ethan would eventually have with her directly. But the immediate aftermath was this. Joe got her grilled cheese. The estate's chef, a kind, round-faced man named Gerald who had worked for the Calloway family for 11 years, made it with sourdough bread and 3 kinds of cheese and cut it into triangles because, as Joe informed him with great authority, triangles taste better. Gerald agreed completely. Maya sat at the kitchen island and watched her daughter eat and laugh at something Gerald said, and for the first time in a very long time she let herself breathe. She didn't know yet what had just shifted. She didn't know yet what Ethan had said to Serena, or what Serena had said back, or what old cracks that conversation had ripped open between two people who were planning to spend the rest of their lives together. She just knew her daughter was warm and fed and safe. And that, for today, was enough. What would you have done if you were Ethan? Stay quiet or speak up? Tell me below. The truth has a way of surfacing, not always gently, but always at exactly the right moment. The week after that afternoon was strange and electric in the way that weeks before major changes always are. Tense on the surface, turbulent underneath, with everyone moving carefully like they were afraid of what might crack. Serena was cold. Not just to Maya, she was cold to Ethan too. Cold in a way that felt less like hurt feelings and more like strategy. Like a woman recalculating. Maya continued her work. She didn't bring Joe again. She'd arranged a more permanent backup. Her neighbor Mrs. Patterson, a retired schoolteacher who adored children and charged less than a formal daycare. Maya paid her gladly. But something had changed in the house. She felt it. Ethan began appearing in rooms where he hadn't appeared before. Not intrusively. He wasn't the kind of man to hover. But she would be reorganizing the library and he'd come in to get a book and they'd exchange a few sentences. She'd be in the garden cutting flowers for the dining table and he'd walk through on his way to the guest house and pause to ask about Joe. "How's the rabbit?" he asked one morning. "Biscuit is well," Maya said with a small smile. "Joe announced yesterday that Biscuit needs a friend. I've been warned." Ethan laughed. "Real one. Not the polite kind." And Maya thought, not for the first time, that this man seemed genuinely lonely. Not in a sad way. In a quiet way. The kind of lonely that builds up slowly when you've spent years surrounded by the wrong people. It was during the second week that Ethan's personal assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Dana, came to find Maya on a Thursday afternoon. She had an envelope in her hand. "Mr. Calloway asked me to give you this." Inside was a check. An amount that made Maya's hands go still. It was 3 months' salary. In full. Plus a handwritten note. "Maya, this is not severance. Your job is secure. This is an apology. No one in this house should ever make you feel like your child is a burden. Please use this however helps your family most. E.C." Maya read it twice. Then she folded it very carefully and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket, close to her chest, and she went back to work because she needed something to do with her hands before she fell apart. That same evening, Ethan found her in the hallway. He looked like he hadn't slept well. Like he'd been turning things over in his mind for days and finally landed somewhere. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said. "Yes," she said, because with this man, she somehow always meant it. "Do you think—" He stopped. Started again. "Do you think a person can be in a relationship for so long that they forget to check whether they're actually happy? Like, they're so deep into the plan of it that they lose track of the actual reality?" Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think that's one of the most human things there is. I think it happens to a lot of people." He nodded. Looked at the floor. Then at her. "Serena and I have been together for 4 years," he said. "We got engaged because it was the next logical step. That's not a good reason." Maya didn't say anything. She just listened. "The way she spoke to you that day," he said. "And to Joe." He shook his head. "I've been watching her for a long time without really seeing her. And that day I finally saw her clearly." He paused. "I ended the engagement last night." The hallway was very quiet. "I'm sorry," Maya said gently. "That couldn't have been easy." "It was easier than I expected," he said honestly. "And that told me everything I needed to know." Do you believe people stay in the wrong relationships too long because they're afraid of starting over? Me no. What looks like an ending is almost always a beginning in disguise. The months that followed were quiet ones. Purposeful ones. Serena left the estate. There was no dramatic scene. She had her things collected and she was gone within a week, and the house breathed differently after that. Lighter. Like a window had been opened after a long winter. Ethan threw himself into a project he'd been putting off for 2 years. A non-profit initiative tied to his company, focused on providing tech education and scholarships to single parents returning to the workforce. He'd had the idea for a long time. He just hadn't had the clarity to begin it. He began it now. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, the planning meetings and the board calls and the late nights in the study surrounded by papers, he started talking to Maya. Not as employer to employee. As one person to another. It happened gradually, naturally, the way real things always do. He'd be in the kitchen getting coffee at 7 p.m. and she'd still be there finishing something up, and they'd talk for an hour without either of them noticing the time passing. He'd ask about her nursing degree, the one she'd abandoned for her mother. She'd ask about the company, the early years, the dorm room where it all began. He learned that she still kept her old nursing textbooks, that she sometimes read them on Sunday mornings before Joe woke up, that she hadn't given up on the idea, she'd just buried it under the weight of survival. She learned that his parents had been working-class people from western Pennsylvania, that his father had worked 2 jobs for most of Ethan's childhood and never complained once, that Ethan had spent the first decade of his success feeling like a fraud. Like any moment someone would figure out that he didn't actually belong in the rooms he was standing in. I still feel that way sometimes, he admitted one evening. I think everyone does, she said. The ones who don't feel it are usually the ones who never examine anything. He looked at her for a long moment. You're remarkable, you know that? She laughed softly. I'm a woman who brought her 3-year-old to work and nearly got fired. You're a woman who raised that 3-year-old alone, gave up her own future to care for her mother, never stopped being kind in circumstances that would have made most people bitter, and still shows up every single day. He paused. I see you, Maya. I want you to know that. It took another 3 months before he asked if she'd like to have dinner with him. Not at the estate. Somewhere neutral, somewhere that wasn't employer and employee and all the weight of those titles. He said yes. Joe came with them because she came with Maya everywhere, and Ethan had insisted, and Joe brought biscuit and wore her purple dress and spent most of dinner telling Ethan about a butterfly she'd seen in the garden that week. Ethan listened like she was the most important person in the room. 'Cause she was. A year later, on a Tuesday evening in November, exactly 2 years after Maya's mother had passed, in a year that had carried both grief and grace, Ethan got down on one knee in the kitchen. Not a grand gesture. No audience. No photographer. Just the 3 of them, and Biscuit, who was propped against the fruit bowl, and Ethan holding a ring and looking at Maya like she had always been exactly where he was supposed to arrive. I know this is not the conventional path, he said. His voice slightly unsteady in the way that real emotion makes voices. But I don't want the conventional path. I want this one. I want you. I want Joe. I want whatever version of the future we build together. Joe, who had been told nothing and had wandered into the kitchen for a glass of water, looked at the ring, looked at Ethan, looked at her mama, and said with complete authority, Say yes, Mama. Maya laughed, and cried, and said yes. Ethan's non-profit, the one he'd been building since the day he finally started seeing his life clearly, launched its first scholarship program 6 months later. Among the inaugural recipients was a 28-year-old single mother from Ohio who was finishing her nursing degree. Her name was Maya. And this time nothing would stop her. Here's what this story is really about. It's about a little girl holding a rabbit who reminded a billionaire what actually matters. It's about a woman who never stopped being good, even when the world gave her every reason to harden. It's about the fact that sometimes the thing that looks like the worst day of your life, being told to get out in front of your child, is actually the first page of something you couldn't have written for yourself. Cruelty has a way of revealing the truth about everyone in the room. And kindness, the quiet, steady, genuine kind, it never goes unseen. not forever. If you're carrying something heavy today, if you're doing your best in a situation that isn't fair, if you feel invisible, keep going, keep showing up, keep being who you are. Your moment is coming. If this story moved you, please leave a comment. I'd love to know which part hit you hardest. Was it Joe and Biscuit? Was it the moment Ethan stood up for Maya? Was it the ending? Leave a like if this story reminded you that good people still exist in this world. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. We share something new every week that's designed to remind you why hope is always worth holding on to. And please, share this with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose Tuesday this might turn around. Thank you for watching. Until next time, be kind. Costs you nothing and means everything.